And we're back for another crack at this. If you'd like to see my first attempt at trying to combine a bunch of old speaker drivers I've harvested from computers into a decent listening experience, click the card. But long story short, it didn't go super duper well. Today we're going to delve a little bit further into speaker design, to the extent of even talking about circuits a bit, because, we can. And we'll even have a go at introducing less crappy driver hardware into the mix. If you watched the first video in this series, you may notice that I've set aside the two-way crossover I was using in that attempt for the time being. There are a few reasons for that. The main one being that I don't actually have any bespoke tweeters to use in that crossover, and I'm pretty sure that the resistance of all my drivers here is too high to sit in that spot. If that sounded like Latin, don't worry, I'm in the same boat. Let's chat for a second about what a crossover even is, and why you would use one. A speaker crossover is a series of resistors and coils that are used to break an electrical signal apart so two drivers can be used together with a range of frequencies that are best suited to their construction. I won't pretend I know exactly how this works, but the effect is that using a different set of components for each driver, a crossover is able to feed the high-frequency sounds in one direction and the lower-frequency sounds in another. In the case of a three-way crossover, it will break out the highs, mids, and lows. This allows the drivers to focus on outputting only the frequencies they're designed for, without muddying their sound by forcing them to try and produce frequencies they're not designed for. So a crossover is necessary to build a good speaker with a broad frequency range. But I'm still just trying to come to grips with the problem here, so we're skipping that and just hooking multiple drivers up to the same channel output. This will send the same signal through both speakers, so if you've got two different types of driver hooked up together, you'll get each of them emphasizing whatever frequencies they're strongest in, and the combination will allow you to hear approximately what they'd sound like assuming they were wired up correctly. That's my theory, anyways. You can see I'm hooking the speakers up in series, meaning that each driver is hooked to the amp on one side and then to another driver on the other. This is because speakers are themselves resistors, and wiring it up this way adds the resistance of one speaker to another, while wiring them up in parallel, with each speaker making contact with the amp on both ends, halves their combined resistance. So while yes, wiring them up in series does make it harder for the amp to push current through them, wiring them in parallel introduces the possibility of extremely low impedance causing a runaway effect that could damage the amp. Given that this thing was really cheap, I'm gonna stick with this. Besides, this isn't the final form anyway, it's a proof of concept. And as you hopefully have been able to hear, assuming my mic is up to the task, combining the tiny laptop drivers with the larger laptop woofer does in fact provide better coverage of the frequency range of this track. It's a weird sort of sound, obviously, because these speakers aren't actually good. Which, I knew, but I kept them anyways. I think the real issue here is that I don't have the willpower to just not buy a used laptop if it's only 25 cents regardless of whether or not it actually works. I have a problem. Do they have therapists for this? Used tech buying compulsion? I'd say it's probably symptomatic of an underlying cause, but this sort of behavior has persisted through both high and low emotional points in my life, and geez, y'all, maybe we're onto something here. Maybe I'm totally unique. And in point of fact, I actually hope I'm totally unique in the jankiness of this setup. For the record, I do not condone nor recommend the thing that I am doing. Which is why I'm doing it, of course, so you don't have to assuage your curiosity. Adding this 4-inch sub actually causes some problems, given it does pretty well with low tones and kinda drowns out the anemic highs from the laptop speakers. But the takeaway is that I've got a solid mid driver here, and some options, however lousy, for highs. That said, I suspect that my next real task is to track down something that approaches the response of a tweeter to try and actually cover the higher frequency stuff. All that into consideration, though, this feels like progress. I'm getting a much fuller sound signature, and despite running all of these in series, the amp is having no trouble pushing plenty of sound through them at totally reasonable volume levels. For the next time, I have some theories about how I can get my highs sorted out based around the one type of common computer speaker that I am at least partially hopeful uses the same basic construction methodology as a tweeter. Those of you who have used old desktops know what I'm talking about.